Yes.
Okay. So if we have a quorum, why don't you go ahead and call the roll and we'll get started.
Sounds good. Michael Jordan.
Here.
Steve Fancher.
Here.
Eric Mueller.
Here.
Dave Ripma.
Here.
John Niyama. Shirley Craddock indicated she would not be present. Lori Stegman. Ann Gravitt also indicated a potential conflict. Corky Collier.
Here.
James Allison.
Here.
Mary Helen Kincaid. She's coming later. Tanny Stephenson.
Here.
Eric Molander. Janelle Bell. Ed Washington.
Here.
Bob Salinger. I'm counting 8 board members. Oh, here comes Mary Helen.
Mary Helen on.
Helen's on.
All right. Terrific. So I believe we have a quorum. And so the first thing to do is to convene the budget committee. And so I'll turn to Tanny to do that.
Okay. Thank you, Chair Jordan. At this time, I'd like to call to order the Budget Committee meeting for the Urban Flood Safety Water Quality District for April 18th, 2022. And at this time, is there any public testimony today?
Chair Stephenson, I have not received any written testimony, nor have I received any requests to have verbal testimony, but I don't know if there's anyone present here during the meeting that might want to.
Okay, anyone? Not seeing any. Okay, let's go ahead and proceed forward. Mr. Ben Rowe, please.
Good afternoon. Budget Committee, thank you for your time today. I am at your disposal. Let me share my screen here really quick, and I'll just review to date what we've done. We have presented the proposed budget on Monday, March 21st. We also had a Budget Committee meeting work session on Wednesday, April 6th, and then we are here today. So I'm happy to share with you a review of the budget or anything that you would like to see. But this is what I have prepared for you today. Just next steps when you're ready.
Okay. Are there any questions for staff regarding the budget? If there's none from anybody.
Chair Stephenson, I will point out, we do have a guest from the TSCC on the line. I don't know whether they have questions or any comments they'd like to make, if that's even appropriate, but I just wanted to acknowledge them. Thanks for being here, TSCC member.
Thanks so much. This is Allegra Wilhite. And yes, I appreciate the acknowledgement, but no need. I'm just here to observe. It's my first year as executive director with TSCC. So this is a big day, budget approval. I'm just here to observe. Yeah,
Well,
go ahead. We'll look forward to having our hearing with you scheduled. I see on your schedule here for June.
Welcome and thank you. Okay, and everyone saw in the packet the list of questions and answers from Mr. Ben Rowe. And if there aren't any further questions, entertain a motion to approve the budget as presented.
I so move.
Okay, do we have a second?
And I'll second. This is Corky.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve the proposed budget for fiscal year 2022-23 as proposed by the budget officer, and refer the budget to the Urban Flood Safety Water Quality District Board for hearing and adoption. Any discussion on the motion? Okay, if you could call the roll, please.
Michael Jordan,
Yes.
Steve Fancher,
Yes.
Eric Mueller,
Yes.
Dave Ripma,
Yes.
John Niyama, Shirley Craddock, Lori Stegman, Ann Gravitt. I'm sorry. Ann Gravitt, Corky Collier,
Yes.
James Allison,
Yes.
Mary Helen Kincaid,
Yes.
Penny Stephenson,
Yes.
Eric Molander,
Yes.
Ed Washington,
Yes.
Bob Salinger, Janelle Bell, Chair Stephenson, we have 9 yeses and the rest are absent.
Okay, so that passes. Great job, everyone. And with that, we will adjourn the Budget Committee meeting for the Urban Flood Safety Water Quality District. And I will turn it back over to Chair Jordan.
All right, thanks, Tanny. Very efficiently done as usual. We're going to reconvene the Flood Safety Water Quality District Board. And the next item on the agenda is an IGA amendment for cost recovery. Keith?
Thank you, Chair Jordan. Good afternoon, everyone. Keith Hobson, I'm your interim CFO. Our requested action today is to approve the resolution amending the intergovernmental agreement, or the IGA, between the Urban District and MCDD to simplify the accounting of MCDD staff time being charged to the Urban District. This is a fairly technical issue, so we want to provide some background and context for this recommendation. In July 2021, the two districts entered into an IGA covering the provision of administrative services by MCDD in exchange for cost reimbursement by the Urban District to MCDD. The method for cost reimbursement used in the IGA was consistent with all of the other districts, and it relied on detailed time and materials billing, which in turn was based on staff charges of time spent on Urban District activities as recorded on their timesheets. There are two problems with the current approach that we want to address. One is gaps in recovery. The current method is based on direct staff, the direct costs of staff on a per hour basis, plus an overhead rate of 27% multiplied by the hours spent. This is leaving gaps. Some administrative costs, such as human resource management, are not included in the overhead rate, nor are they direct charged to the Urban District since there are no staff in the Urban District. A portion of staff time also is unbillable. This would include leave time, sick leave, vacation time, potentially trainings and other items. And these are neither built into the rates, nor are they available to direct bill. So by default, these gaps result in a subsidy by MCDD. This process also is complex. It relies on staff judgment on when to charge the Urban District, and this can be inconsistently applied. The preference in the past was to not bill due to limited Urban District funding. It's also difficult sometimes to assign activities that are broad administrative activities and benefit all the districts, and therefore the time spent on those activities is not allocated or billed to the Urban District. Because of these issues, we met with the two board chairs for MCDD and the Urban District and reviewed several options to address these concerns. I'll review two of these that may still be part of our discussions with other districts in the future. One is to make significant revisions to the overhead calculation and the direct billing rates to close some of the gaps that I identified. There may still be a need to do this, but we will do it across all the districts to ensure that these remain consistent. And this will be part of our fiscal year-end IGA adjustments where we update billing rates and overhead rates. Doing this by itself wouldn't address the complexity issue and the workload of calculating the billings. Another possibility was to move to a flat billing approach for non-project administrative and maintenance activity and base this on historical averages of cost of time spent. Well, this approach might work for the legacy districts. The lack of history for the urban district and the significant change in activity levels over the next few years make this approach really not feasible for the urban district. This may still be something we want to consider as an option for the legacy districts. So with that, we have a specific recommended approach for the urban district. We did identify an approach that addresses the concerns and could be easily implemented. It involves identifying staff positions that would have their costs directly allocated to the urban district, rather than capturing these through detailed billing of time charged. The staff that were identified are based on staff who have a predictable level of work for the urban district, coupled with the nature of their work that often makes identification of time spent difficult. The identified staff are detailed in the proposed IGA amendment, along with the percentage of their time that would be allocated. Other staff could still charge their time to the urban district and would continue to do so on the detailed time basis that we've been using in the past. One of the reasons to make this change now is that the budgets for both the urban district and MCDD assume a certain percentage of staff staff time that would be paid for by the urban district, and therefore assume this as expense to the urban district and revenue to MCDD. And this equated to approximately $650,000 of urban district expense and corresponding revenue to MCDD. The actual charges based on the current system are falling significantly short of this for many of the reasons I identified. And this is creating a significant revenue shortfall in MCDD. Since the costs involved in MCDD are primarily staffing, MCDD is not seeing cost savings that can fully offset this revenue shortfall. And this is why we're proposing to make this change effective January 1 and continuing through June 30. Based on this timing, the amount of directly allocated staff costs to the urban district would be approximately $220,000. This is still well under the budgeted amount and the anticipated revenue in MCDD, but it will be supplemented by some direct billing of other staff doing work on the urban district. So to implement this recommendation, we do need to amend the IGA between the urban district and MCDD. We're making this request to both boards, and last week the MCDD board received the same request and approved the resolution authorizing the IGA amendment. The proposed amendments to the IGA have been drafted to allow this direct allocation of identified staff, and this language has been reviewed and clarified by the district legal counsel. With that, that completes the staff report on it, and I'm going to be happy to take any questions.
Eric?
Yeah, Keith, I just wanted to clarify, this would be back to January 1st of 2022. So for the remaining half of this fiscal year. And then has the recommended approach been factored into the budget for both entities for the coming year?
Yeah, that's excellent question. Yes, it is correct that it would be for the last half of the current fiscal year we're in. It is anticipated to continue on, although we do need to do IGA amendments, normal IGA amendments for the districts anyway. And this basis was what we built our budget on. So it is anticipated in the budget that was just approved.
Great.
Eric Molander.
We've identified, or I'm curious as to these overhead gap that we have that has not been rebuilt. What's the total amount of that in your best estimate?
I'd hate to even hazard a guess on it. Okay. And some of it would be based on how broadly we want to apply overhead. I would say I'd hesitate to even cover a guess on it. We're not proposing to change that with this adjustment anyway. That would be a future calculation. And I think that would be a great time for us to do some analysis on what that gap could be on the overhead that we're not charging.
Okay. And then the impact on our budget for this year is going to be favorable or unfavorable?
The impact of this amendment will increase the cost to the urban board, but you will still be well under the budgeted amount for the current year. So you will have a favorable budget variance. But I want to be really clear, this action will slightly increase the cost. And the reason we're doing so is because an underspending of that recovery by the urban district results in a significant under recovery of revenue by MCDD, which is creating constraints there.
Follow-up question to that. We have 85% of a urban flood safety and water quality district transition project manager. This is the first time I've heard of such a position. Who fills it and what is their role?
You want to take that, Keith, or you want me to?
Go ahead, please.
Colin is out today, but this is Emily transitioned over to project manage all things transition starting in January, and we're backfilling her position with a limited duration office manager role. She continues to supervise our front desk person, and she will supervise the office manager, which is why she said 85%. That may transition as we backfill the CFO position when Keith goes back to retirement.
Okay, thank you.
Good questions.
Any other questions or comments? You have a fairly thorough staff report in your packet also.
Mr. Chair, would you entertain a motion?
I would, Eric, thank you.
I would move to approve the Amendment 1 to the intergovernmental agreement between MCDD and the Urban District for the administration support as outlined in Resolution 2022-0401.
Great, thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Eric. The Erics are all over it today. All right. Any further questions or comments? Seeing none, Wendy, would you call the roll, please?
Michael Jordan,
Yes.
Steve Fancher,
Yes.
Eric Mueller,
Yes.
Dave Ripma,
Yes.
Corky Collier,
Yes.
Mary Helen Kincaid,
Yes.
James Allison,
Yes.
Tanny Stephenson,
Yes.
Eric Molander,
Yes.
Ed Washington,
Ed, are you there?
maybe on another call. Let me,
Also may not realize how important his vote is today.
Yes, I'm sorry, I was muted. I don't know
That's
why, but yes. my vote
That's
is yes.
okay. Thank you, Ed. Appreciate it.
are there any other board members present that I didn't call their names? I think the rest are absent.
Okay, we have 9 votes.
10.
10. All right. All right, terrific. Thank you. And thank you, Keith. Very thorough staff report. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
The next issue on the agenda is equity framework and strategy. Jim?
I'm ready to go. Wendy, do you want to put the first slide up and I'll try and get you through this? This may not be quite as easy as the last 2 votes. I just want to warn you. And first, this is really a key new mandate for our organization, and it comes from ORS 550. And for those of you who haven't kept your dog-eared copy with you every day and read it each morning like I do, ORS 550 calls on us to promote equity and social justice in all aspects of the district's operations. And so it was frankly one of the reasons this position was really exciting for me. And I know it's really important to a lot of people on our staff. So it's a really important piece of work. And I want to start by saying it's really important to this organization's long-term success. We really need to reflect the community that we serve. And I think it's clear, at least to me, and I'll speak for myself, that there are certain communities who have been underserved throughout the years, and that there are continuing to be systemic barriers that prevent equal and equitable access to the services that we provide. So our goal as a staff is to embody both the letter and the spirit of ORS 550 with our work, and to rely on our best practices that we can find throughout the community and around the nation to begin to implement actions that start to live up to this mandate in ORS 550. We'll also be informing some of the other mandates too, including the revenue work that is your focus, really trying to identify how we build equity and social justice into all of our work will be really critical to figuring out the appropriate revenue mechanism. Little bit of history on this work before I get into it. This work was started before I joined the organization, and it was being led by an interdepartmental staff team with support from an outside consulting firm called Ontiveros and Associates. And they do a lot of work with public sector and private sector companies to help them imbue more equitable activities and actions and strategy into their work. So rather than keep that framework that had been started solely by MCDD only with MCDD, it made a lot of sense to me to be strategic in the use of that great work and apply it to the new mandate of the urban district, particularly because with any luck, and you'll learn more about this later, within the next couple of years, of course, the legacy districts will go away. So we're going to build on what MCDD did and really imbue it with the new mandate. I want to recognize that this topic may be newer to some of you, particularly those of you who aren't imbued in the public sector every single day, and that we have some different levels of experience and knowledge on this topic, and that this topic can be challenging and can be a little bit uncomfortable. And so I just want to acknowledge that, and I want to ask you to be ready and be curious about this work. And if you are feeling uncomfortable, it's pretty normal and it's not intentional. But I think it's part of the process that we all need to go through to help make a better community. So Wendy, if you go to the next slide, I'm going to give you a brief overview of our proposed equity framework and talk to you about how we're going to really process it through the board and give you guys a lot of opportunities to work with it and make sure it reflects the direction you want to provide to staff. And we'll discuss the timeline and the process next. So I want to refresh this. We presented this to you a meeting or two ago, and I think it's really important to remember that equity is different than equality. And this slide's been used in a lot of different places. So for those of you who've seen it a million times, my apologies, but I do think it works really well. You see on the left equality, where everyone's given the same box to stand on, but it doesn't really address the challenge of being able to see the game. Equity means being proactive about making investments that remove barriers so that everyone has the opportunity to watch the game. And you can see that here. The game is a really poor metaphor for the seriousness of this work, but in this case, I think it gives you an idea of the general direction that this organization needs to go. We need to be proactive in addressing past barriers and current barriers that impact some communities more than others. So we're not going to do everything the same for everyone. We're actually going to be proactive in addressing things that are wrong. Okay, next slide. You may recall this from our partnership work proposal from before. And I want to start in the middle of this. Again, this is a bit complicated as a graphic, but it's a good reminder for me that there are really two different things that we are going to be focused on as we develop our equity strategy. First, in the center, you see how we work. And that's really the way we hire, the way we recruit, the way we retain, who we purchase from, how we purchase, how we convene ourselves, how we do public engagement. All those things in the how are really critical to creating equal access or equitable access and removal of barriers, particularly for communities who've been underserved. So the key focus is going to be changing how we work fundamentally. But there's also the work that we do, and you see that broken into four big quadrants here. And I'll start in the upper left with flood risk reduction. Just some examples for you. We don't have an action plan yet, but this gives you an indication of how our framework should start to inform change in how we do our work and the way we do our work. So as we think about flood risk reduction, we really want to think about who's most vulnerable. Those might be some homeless folks. It might be folks who have less ability to recover after a flood. We're going to want to really engage them carefully as we think about our programming. As I move over to the lower left and look at the flood emergency response, Again, we need to identify those who are most likely to not hear and make sure we're doing outreach to them. Again, I think about our houseless populations. I think about people with disabilities who may struggle to escape a flood risk. So we want to really be prepared and focus on those who are most impacted and those who have the least capability to respond. If I move to the upper right and we think about the environmental benefit work that the legislature has asked us to do, that's the watershed planning and climate change and resilience work. We really, again, want to focus on those communities with expertise, those communities who are likely to have the most impacts as a result of those challenges, perhaps people who have suffered from the siting of industrial facilities or past discharges, brownfields examples that we should be thinking about. And we want to really include those folks as we think about how we're going to create environmental benefit through our flood safety and emergency response mission. And then last, we'll highlight a little bit in the lower right, cultural history. And I think it's really important for us to think about cultural history, not just as a telling of past activities, but as a way to give voice to communities who've been impacted by the history of the managed floodplain, give them voice today and into the future so that they have a say in our operations and that they can create capacity in those communities to participate in flood safety services and flood response services and our environmental benefit work. Again, really want to emphasize that it's the work we do. We're going to influence those things, but we're also going to be focused on that center and how we work. Okay, next slide, please. So what you have here is a slide that describes the draft table of contents for the equity framework. And I think this is a good time for me to share with you that I had hoped to have a draft framework in your hands at the end of this meeting today. But I'm taking the time to get a little bit more feedback from our team and from some outside perspectives to make sure that we get it right. We'll be chunking through this with you over the coming weeks, and I'll explain that in a minute. But what I want you to hear today is that we have a draft document, and we've had a lot of help from experts and from our team, and it has really 5 key components to it. The first is an introduction, which is pretty typical in a document like this. It's sort of your executive summary, tells you what it's about and what you're going to read as you go through it. The second is some background and context, and it talks a little bit about some of the history of the managed floodplain and some of the communities who've been harmed, some who've benefited. Really tries to lay out how we're thinking about that. And it also talks a little bit about the evolution of equity work within the drainage districts, starting with MCDD's work and moving into the new mandates of the urban district. The third section of the framework really describes what it means to have an equity action plan and to have an equity framework that undergirds your thinking about equity strategy. It incorporates a proposed equity mission, vision, and goals, and some guiding principles and key definitions. Definitions are going to be really key, and I'm going to talk about that more in a minute. The fourth section really tries to identify who are those folks that we maybe have neglected, who haven't heard from us or we haven't heard from, who are maybe less visible but equally important to the success of our mission. So we really want to identify those folks and keep them in mind as we plan our work and think about how we do our public engagement. And then the fifth section, which is really light right now because that's what we really want to engage the board in, is what are we going to do? What are we going to do? How are we going to actually make change? How are we going to implement different ways of doing our work to achieve this mandate that the legislature has provided for us? Finally, there are 2 appendices. There's an equity action plan template. We borrowed that template from talking to the port and the city and a bunch of other organizations. It's blank right now, but again, starts to point to the direction we're going to need to go to have a robust equity action plan. And then finally, there's a second appendix that lists a bunch of words that are really critical that we have a shared understanding of a definition of those. And we'll get into that in just a minute. So if you could go to the next slide, please. Speaking of definitions, definitions are really important. We can have lots of different ideas about what words mean, but for the purposes of our equity framework, there's 3 things I want to address today, and we'll be sending you the appendix of definitions in a few weeks, so you'll have a chance to really dig into this and give us feedback on it. But again, I really want to point out on our definition of equity, at least as I'm going to propose it to you, and again, you're the board, you'll decide and we'll follow your direction, but it really calls on us to be proactive in addressing barriers that have been in place or that were put in place and to remove them so everyone has an equitable chance to benefit from our services and be aware of the work we do. Again, it's not an equal distribution. There have been barriers that have been put up in the past, and we're going to seek to remove them. Okay, so there's an emphasis on removing of barriers on addressing people who have been underserved or more harmed in the past. So it's critical that we have a shared understanding with that. And if this board doesn't like that, we need to know, because we'll need to adjust. Second, Commissioner Craddock and or Councillor Craddock and others have brought up the idea of racial equity. And however you feel about it, what we know today is that race is a key predictor of outcomes in our community and across our nation. That's in employment and health and longevity and income. All kinds of things can be predicted based on race more than a lot of other factors. So we really want to think about being explicit about addressing racial inequities, because we believe it's an opportunity to really address past wrongs, but also by addressing racial equity, we are going to create benefits for low income and for other areas of intersectionality. It could be gender, it could be age, because what we find is that race is such a critical factor in identifying barriers and outcomes that aren't equitable, that we know if we address them, we're going to be addressing everything for a lot of communities. And then last, we want to talk about outcome, and outcome is really what we're focused on. And we want an end state that's different than today. And we'll talk with you more about that as we develop our action plans, that we want to see change in our community, and that outcome is going to be really important. And defining that outcome so that we can determine whether we're making progress to it is going to be really key as well. Okay, next slide. So here's our proposed strategy for you all. And I guess the thing I want to start with is this is a proposed schedule. It's an ambitious schedule, and I expect it might take more time than this, but I want to make sure the board has time to really dig into this, because this is such an important topic to me and to our mission. So on May 4th, we're going to be bringing in a person who's affiliated with Ontiveros and Associates for a strategy work session around equity. We're going to take a couple of hours and really talk about definitions, about equity, about racial justice, those things that come from our authorizing statute. And we're going to work with you on that. We'll have an outside expert really train you up and talk to you and engage you in a conversation about clear definitions. Then we're going to send out to you after that conversation our draft appendix of definitions for all the words. We'll ask you to read that before your May 18th board meeting and be prepared to hopefully finalize those definitions. And then at the meeting, we will review for you our draft equity mission, vision, principles, goals, and we'll have our expert consultants on Ontiveros and Associates here to help us with that conversation on the 18th. Again, that'll be your first overview and discussion of those things that are really key. You'll have more time to work through them. Then a month later in June, we'll ask you to review the entire document and come back with your feedback on it. And ideally on June 20th, we'll have an additional time for you to discuss it. And if we're ready, we can discuss adopting it, or we can discuss next steps to make sure the board feels comfortable with it. And then once that framework is adopted, staff will use it as the basis to develop equity action plans, which we hope to bring to you within 6 to 8 months after the framework is ultimately adopted. That was a lot to throw at you. I regret not having a full document to share with you today. I also think that the document's big enough that we'll probably serve each other well by going through it stepwise, which is our current plan. So with that, I'll stop talking and try and answer any questions you may have. I see, Eric, you have your hand up, but I can't see all of you, so I might need help answering all the questions.
Go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, Jim, my question was just on the timeline. I was confused. You talked about May 4th, and then when you talked about May 18th, you said it would be our first time going through the materials. So I'm confused. Is the May 4th meeting not with the board? Or
no, I'm sorry. We're going to send sections of this document out, and so it'll be the first discussion of the mission, goals, and so on. So it'll be the first time you'll see that section. I got some really good feedback from my colleagues that trying to get you to react to the full document all in one fell swoop probably wouldn't be the best approach. So we're going to walk you through it in a stepwise fashion. So that's what that slide was trying to do. I apologize if I mangled it.
so are we meeting on the 4th for this purpose or not?
I don't have my calendar up. Wendy, save me. Yes, we are meeting on those dates.
Yes,
Okay.
May 4th is a scheduled work session. That's the Wednesday at 1 o'clock, I believe.
Okay, just trying to make sure I'm understanding the schedule. Thank you.
Yeah, and it will likely evolve with your feedback, is I think the message I want to make sure you hear me share with you. Mary Helen, looks like your hand is up.
hands up and mutes on. So mine are not connected questions, but just for my purpose, because I've heard the word framework used in a number of different ways, and different people interpret it. So I wanted you to kind of define what you said by framework as opposed to work plan, as to process, that sort of definition, so that it says we're going to do an equity plan, and I would think an equity plan would already have the framework in it. So just clarify that, and I'll ask the other one, give you a chance to do that, not lump them all together.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I'll ask Evan to jump in after if she wants to. The framework essentially spells out why we're doing this, who's going to be impacted, what our principles are. It essentially it lays out the terms and the policy direction from you all, so that staff can then bring actions back that are consistent with board direction, consistent with best practices. So it identifies the why, it identifies the who, and it spells out the guiding principles behind the what we're going to do.
Okay, that helps. It's just, I think I go to too many meetings and people use the word interchangeably with a lot of different things, and I just wanted
There
to
was
try it.
a version of the document that talked about an equity lens or an equity lens
Yeah.
framework. These terms are a little bit tricky, and I think from my point of view, we need to have some broader discussion at a higher level before we jump straight to actions. This framework is our procedure for documenting the guidance from the board so that we can bring actions back that are consistent with your
Yeah.
direction.
Well,
and
the
our
who, what, why kind of question. It's
right.
kind of how I see it.
Yep.
My other question, and I brought this up before, and I don't know where it fits, but the people with disabilities. We hear about race, gender, sexual orientation, and to the city and to even discussions with the port, they're bringing disabilities into some of their statements. And so I want to make sure that if not in every description, but that that group is considered, because they are underrepresented and they are underserved and they are at risk to suffer the most if there were emergency. And PBEM's doing the same thing to identify those. So if we could include that somewhere in the considerations of what we do, I won't keep saying it, but I will.
No, I think those are important considerations, and I appreciate you bringing them up. I think that really fits in particular in the how we do our work. So in terms of recruitment and how we notice our meetings, and whether we do translation or American Sign Language and things like that. One thing that's a little bit different about us is we don't operate a lot of public facilities with access issues, but we do have access needs for our meetings and decision making. So I would just point out that difference. Right?
No,
We're
and
not
not so
operating
much
a lot of public facilities.
not
that
so much
people travel.
access to the meetings, but access to flood safety issues.
Right. Right. And I think those are the kinds of folks who we will want to make sure we can provide early warning and provide services to, for sure.
And then last but not least, but we said that the outcomes, will that be determined once we go through this whole process, or is that the big picture outcome is a equity plan?
I think the equity plan needs to be aimed at something a little bit more measurable than that. And I think that's part of the need to have some outcomes defined by the board. And again, your staff will help you with that, with some proposed ideas, but the actions need to be tied to those so that they're focused on making a change that you all have directed us to make.
Okay, because when I worked with Dora Perry, who was the equity manager for BDS, she did, I think it's on, I think her document that she wrote is still online at the cities, but defining underserved and underrepresented, because this is sort of a tough way to say it, but I could consider myself underserved because I'm old, I'm a woman, I'm overweight, or I mean, I can be perceived. And so I'll think, well, I'm not getting the same treatment as somebody else, but that's not the definition that we're speaking of underserved. So I think there's wording to underserved because of, or something like that. we spent 2 whole meetings talking about underserved and underrepresented and what the benchmark was, because
And
with
so
the,
we're
with the
gonna have that
BDS
work.
crowd, you run into that a lot. Well,
So we're gonna
I'm
have a work
underserved.
session with you on that very topic.
Okay, good.
And then
Okay.
we'll have a draft set of definitions for board consideration.
It's enlightening. I learned a lot. So, okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thanks for the questions.
Any other questions right off the top here?
Well, thank you for the
Ji-
patience with the presentation and the progress on this. I think I'm really proud of the document that we have, and my only regret is it wasn't quite ready to roll out. And I think the better part of valor is getting this draft in position, because your staff really needs to buy into this if we're going to implement it effectively. So more to come very soon.
All right, great. Thank you, Jim. Next up, Evan on a timeline update.
Yeah, hi folks. Evan Mitchell, Public Affairs and Communications Manager. Wendy, do you mind putting up the timeline for folks? So I am going to apologize ahead of time. I have a little bit of a cold and I'm presenting something that I had not planned on presenting today. Emily, our transition manager, Emily Robertson, is out sick today. So I volunteered to jump in and help present this content since I've been working on this timeline with the team. So I believe it was last month, we came to you and we presented a timeline of how we were going to set up the new revenue structures for the district and begin the transition to operating as one single district. And we got some feedback during that meeting. We got some feedback during other conversations about the timeline. And as staff, we sat down and sort of rehashed this thing to think about the feedback that we've gotten around actually setting up a new billing and collection structure for a new operating revenue. And the timeline that I think is before you, I'm not seeing it. Are you all seeing a timeline?
Yes.
Perfect. Actually, if you can go to the next one, please. So that the swirly timeline is sort of a bigger picture timeline, but this one with the stair steps that's in front of you is more of the shorter term 18 month to 2 year timeline that we went through last time. And staff sat down with Echo Northwest, with some of our partners, and really thought through what was most feasible given the feedback that we got. And this timeline is a revision that has adjusted about a year out. It has us ultimately going to the voters with a proposed bond measure in May of 2024 instead of May of 2023. But in addition to that change, there were some changes around putting the ongoing revenue structure in place. And I'm going to walk through each of those just to sort of orient you to this timeline. The boxes that are solid colors are decision points. The boxes that are white with colored outlines are sort of process points along the way. And so as we're working towards these 2 different revenue decisions, one on the operating revenue structure and one on the GEO bond structure, staff really thought about 2 different points along the process. There's getting you all to the point that you have the information that you need to make a decision about the revenue structure, putting that revenue structure in place, and then actually standing up that revenue structure. And so one of the big things we were looking at here is how do we get as much time as possible to actually set up that revenue structure and begin collecting money. And so ultimately this timeline only delays your decision by about 5-6 months. So, and that will give us a little bit more time to create some feedback loops, to give you more time to process information. But really what we're looking at right now is we're going to continue. Sorry, Corky, I'm reading if the stairs go up, it's an excellent point. Very good point.
We started with a slippery slope and decided it wasn't quite right.
Well, that's true.
Well, so where we are right now, we're working with Echo Northwest, and we're going to keep working with the board and with stakeholders to kind of narrow in our revenue options and narrow in on various program scenarios, with the goal of, in the fall this year, having basically 3 big scenarios that, or we think 3, but a few big scenarios that we're able to assess. We'll then take those scenarios and, with further feedback and analysis of trade-offs, narrow down to what we believe will be the recommended plan. The goal is to have that recommended revenue strategy set and ready to go by winter of 2023. Around January is our goal, so that you'll have several months with this sort of clear staff and consultant recommendation that we can take to public partners, to various community groups, and continue to get feedback. The hope is that all along the way over the next year that you all are involved, that community groups are involved, so that there's no surprise when we get to this recommendation. Then we'll have sort of a formal ordinance process where we'll release the ordinance, we'll take formal public testimony and have some hearings, and ask you all to adopt this final recommended revenue strategy. At which point we hope that gives us about a year, little less, but we will have started working on it already, to actually put that revenue strategy in place. Right now, we think that we're looking at potentially a service fee, and we may be able to stand that up through IGAs with other governmental entities. But there's a lot of conversations that need to happen to continue that on its way. So even a year would be short to do that, but we're hoping that starting that conversation now can really set us up to be able to do that. And we need to collect $1 by the end of 2023 in order to be able to call for the election of the permanent board. And that permanent board is really important because they enable us to call for the dissolution of the drainage districts and really trigger that point. So all of our work is to get to that point. Then we have this sort of second half of this timeline where, as we're putting the billing and collection system in place, we'll also be working on getting our GEO bond ready to go out to the voters. And so that's one of the benefits that we saw in sequencing this timeline, with adding another year to this timeline, was that we could kind of separate out operating revenue and GEO bond and have a stakeholder process around both. We also, let's see, what else do I want to call out here? So as we go into this process of developing the GEO bond package, we'll be able to have kind of its own stakeholder process and advisory group to help advise and make some decisions about the GEO bond package. And then our hope is that by the fall of 2023, the board will be able to call for a vote of the permanent board and refer a GEO bond package to the voters. We say fall of 2023, but there'll be some wiggle room there. Our legal counsel has really advised us to shoot for 6 months out for referring the GEO bond package, but we have a little bit of wiggle room around that. Really, our drop dead deadline on the GEO bond package will be the filing deadlines, which begin in February of 2024. And then March is the ultimate filing deadline. And then the rest of this will look familiar. Once we file, then the ballot will be on the May election. And hopefully, if all that works out, we get the permanent board elected in May, we get the GEO bond passed in May, then by summer 2024, this board will be able to sort of transition to the permanent board, and we'll be able to call for the dissolution of the drainage districts, and the drainage districts will have up to a year to kind of complete that dissolution process. So I think with that, I want to see, I'm sure I missed a bunch of really important points, Jim. So what would you add to what I just presented?
Well, first of all, thank you for pinch hitting in a pinch, as it were, literally. The only thing that I want to illuminate just a tiny bit, and there's not a whole lot of additional light to be shed yet, but you did discuss these scenarios, and there's a concept that staff is working on where we might bring you sort of 3 alternative perspectives on the programs and the costs associated with those, with the idea that that might be simpler for the board to start to evaluate between, I'm going to go out on a limb here. I'm making this up. This does not reflect our consultant team yet. But we know we spend about 15 million a year right now to operate. And that doesn't incorporate new mandates. So we could bring you a scenario at the current expenditures, recognizing that it's shy of what the legislature expects us to do. We also know that if we're at 15 million today, we're probably not going to go to $100 million a year in revenue, right? There's some logical political endpoint on the other side. And then there's some room in between those. And so what we're endeavoring to do is see if we can't bring you, here's a couple of 3 options for your consideration, and then you can start to move those around a little bit. We think that might be an easier way to help the board have a conversation. So I just wanted to flesh that out a little bit. And I think as we start to build that work plan out, you'll see your spaces to get your hands on that and drive the direction a little more aggressively than we've had you doing so far.
That's a good reminder. Jen, I also wanted to add, we're working with ECHO right now to really flesh out what the board process looks like. We recognize that this is a lot of information. We throw it up on a screen, expect you all to understand it. So we're really fleshing out exactly what those decision points will be. And those of you who have been participating in the conversation all along have seen sort of what some of those are going to be. But we expect to have a lot more information for you in the next month or so about really what the process for you all is going to look like.
We did get a question about the difference between the operating revenue and the capital bond.
Eric had his hand up first.
Sorry.
So let's start with Eric and then we'll go to the chat.
Okay.
Go ahead, Eric.
Yes, let me double check to make certain. Okay, I'm not on mute. So a lot of this extension of the timeline is related to billing and the process of billing and collecting, correct? At this point, what you've done is really focused on having a public entity do that on behalf of the urban, correct? Have you considered using a commercial entity to bill and collect for us? And would that give us any possibility of advancing our timeline at all?
I wish Colin were here. Sarah, are you still on, or Evan? Sorry, Evan, if you know the answer.
I do. So I know it's part of the conversation, but I don't yet know what the outcome of that conversation has been. So it's something that will be assessed, but we don't, it's one of the options that we'll continue to talk about as we go.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry, Eric, did you have a follow-up or anything?
And no, it's just that at some point I'd like to have an executive session talking about legal strategies associated with the fee for service. I just want to have a executive session where we talk with counsel about when we get sued over this, how do we respond? And
Sure.
As long as it's sort of noted and in the minutes, I'm happy.
Okay, that makes sense. There is a question in the chat from Philip Morley, and Philip happens to be, so you all know, he's the new city manager of Fairview. So his question is issuing the GO bond independent of how we ultimately raise revenue, either by fees or tax?
Mike, do you want to take that, or you want me to, or Evan?
However you want to do it.
Why don't you go, Mike? I think you've got this one.
Well, issuing the GO bond will be an independent action by the board. They have to place it on the ballot, and it will be retired. Well, it can be retired a number of ways. At least we have envisioned the retirement being by a property tax levied across the entire district, which is all of Multnomah County, within the urban growth boundary. The actual raising of operating revenue, we are trying to evaluate right now, and what mechanism we would use and what methodology we might use. We've been discussing a utility methodology for some time, but the consultants are modeling a number of different alternatives for us. So that's where we are right now. Hope that helps, Philip.
And I think we're moving towards a nomenclature of a service fee. And there's some, speaking of Eric's question earlier, there's some important differences between a utility fee and a service fee that become potentially relevant down the road. And then the capital bond is, of course, to provide hopefully the local match for our federal partnership with the Corps of Engineers, and also to give us the capital required to get back into certification and accreditation under the flood insurance program.
All right, Corky.
So, and Philip, we're going to show you how little I understand on this. Would it be correct then to say that in next year, we're hoping to put together the operational revenue structure, that the money we need to get the permanent board to replace the 4 existing boards. And then in 2024, we're going for the GO bond, which would give us the money we need for the levee improvements. And that those are basically independent of each other.
You're really close.
Go ahead, Evan.
Yeah, I think that's really close, Corky. They are independent of each other and they aren't. So as we model our operating revenue, we're going to have to look at how we fund long-term maintenance and additional improvements in the future. It'll be up to future boards to decide if they want to keep going out for GO bonds, but definitely one of the things that we're thinking about as we set up this operating revenue structure is how do we fund our infrastructure in the long term and keep it up and maintain it and upgrade it. And so when you all start to see results from the model that ECHO is building for us, it will incorporate 20-year projections around our infrastructure and different financing tools to be able to maintain and upgrade over time. The GO bond, at least this time around, is really about that big, massive set of upgrades that we need to do to kind of get up to today's standards.
So I've been linking the permanent board, the replacement for this board right here, to the GO bond, but maybe that's incorrect.
We are not required by statute to have all of the capital needs addressed. We are required to have the operating revenues come in.
Right. So we need the 2023 operating revenues. We need that structure set up. Then we can go ahead and go with the permanent board and then leave it to them to come up with the GO in a way. Yeah.
That's one way you could do it. I will say, and I think Ben and Keith and Bill and others will agree with me, but it's ultimately up to the board that our current operating revenues are insufficient to adequately fund our capital needs. So you can either choose to do that through a capital bond through the voters every now and then, or you can start to set aside some money out of your ongoing revenue for your capital needs. I would recommend, and I think you'll hear from your staff, that you should do some of both.
Okay. With no other questions, Evan, I think you're up again on the communications and engagement contracts.
Yeah. Well, thank you, folks. And I will just say on that timeline, we're going to keep talking about this stuff and you'll be getting more information. We'll continue to have more conversations. So if you have questions, you want us to come talk about the timeline with anybody on your staff or your team, we're definitely looking for feedback and more conversation.
Yeah, so I think you're gonna see us fan out a little bit and try and have some coffees with y'all too, and make sure we know where you're coming from and that we create a great space for you to ask all your questions, because we really appreciate the feedback you guys are providing.
All right, so you all get me again for the communications on-call contract that was in your materials. We sent out a memo sort of summarizing a recent procurement that we did. Wendy, if you can go to the next slide. I have been working for the districts for almost 4 years now, and over that course of time, we've had very few communications contracts of any kind and support. And as we anticipate going into this next effort for the urban district, we envision needing some support and some added capacity to help us with that work. And so what we're asking you from you today is to authorize Jim, our ED, to negotiate and sign contracts with Kearns and West and Cascadia partners using contract templates that have been provided by our legal counsel, and our legal counsel will review these contracts. These two contracts are over and above the threshold that requires board authorization, and have come out of a recent procurement effort that we did. Wendy, if you can go to the next slide. So our procurement, there's a lot on this slide, but I'll try to describe it. Our procurement effort really went out looking for sort of 3 areas of work that we needed support in. One is strategic communications. Really closely tied to that is public opinion research. If we're going to be, especially going out to the voters with referring a geo bond to the voters, we're going to want to be able to do some polling and focus group testing along the way. And then the third category is community engagement, building our capacity and increasing the relationships that we have in the community to do more engagement around the work that we were just talking about in the timeline. And so we set out to find 5-year contracts. So our hope here was to create sort of big comprehensive contracts that we would access through task orders. So in the contract, we have these really large not to exceed budgets. The intent is not to spend that amount. The intent is to be able to issue over a number of years based on whatever the board approves in the annual budget. So for instance, during your budget committee earlier, you voted to approve a budget that included $400,000 for communications and $300,000 for community engagement. If you authorize these contracts, we would not be able to spend more than that in the coming year. And I would say, if we're not going to the bond, if we're not going to the ballot in FY23, it's unlikely we will spend all of that in the coming fiscal year. So next slide, please. So after our procurement process, we put out this big RFP. Oops, sorry, you skipped one. We put out a big RFP. We got 12 complete proposals. We interviewed 6 candidates and came down to three contractors, 2 of which are at the level that requires board review. And so we really encouraged contractors that were thinking about submitting proposals for this RFP to think about team approaches and to think about bringing on subcontractors to help put proposals in for all 3 categories, which for us just helps from an administrative standpoint. It means fewer contracts that we're administering, fewer task orders that we're administering, and fewer monthly invoices that we're having to process. And so we ultimately ended up selecting a combo of firms. Kearns and West was one of the firms that came forward with like sort of a full comprehensive approach, including a number of subcontractors to help on the strategic communications, the public opinion, and community engagement side. We also got a really strong proposal from Cascadia Partners. Some of you may be familiar with them. They work with a number of the public entities in town, currently working on the big project that comes to mind for me is the Portland Expo Center. They're a part of that study to look at what is done with the Expo Center in the future. And so right now, our proposal is to set up contracts for strategic communications with Kearns and West, for public opinion polling with Kearns and West through their subcontract, and we'll work with their subcontractor at FM3 Research. And then we'll have 2 community engagement contracts that we can tap into, one with Kearns and West, and they have a subcontract with community engagement liaison services, which is a particular kind of outreach strategy to BIPOC communities. And then Cascadia Partners also does specific engagement with BIPOC communities in sort of a different, with a different approach. And so that gives us, at least what the staff has been talking about, is it gives us a couple different approaches to do in community engagement as our work continues over the next few years. So with that, I think I have one more slide, and it's just to emphasize these are 5-year contracts. The not to exceed budget is not a guaranteed payment. It's just a maximum limit on the total contract. We actually, the guaranteed payments will be based on task orders that will specify specific work with specific budgets that are based on annual appropriations by the board. So with that, I would be happy to take questions, discussion, and then there was a proposed motion in the agenda, and I think on the subsequent slide.
So any questions of Evan or comments? I have one question, Evan. You mentioned in the engagement part some of the specialty of those firms to work with BIPOC communities. Can you tell me, are the companies that you've noted in the slide women or minority-owned firms?
Yeah, they both are. Kearns and West is a woman-owned firm, and Cascadia Partners is a woman and minority-owned firm.
Okay, thank you. Eric Mullender, your hand up first.
Yes, thank you. So we'll begin with, this is all money that will be spent by the urban district and will not be spent by SDIC or Penn One, correct?
So the not to exceed amount here includes some money that will be spent by the other districts, but not very much. The vast majority of it. But other districts will tap into these contracts for things like website maintenance, but we're talking, it's really minimal. You look confused. I didn't answer that question well.
Yeah, close enough. So basically this is anticipated spending by us, and do we, at this point, you really don't have a budget by year or any impact that would have on our coming fiscal year, correct?
What we proposed in the budget would be the maximum impact in the next fiscal year, which is a total of 700,000. But as we've described, we think the spending will be substantially lower based on the schedule.
Okay, and so of the 1.5 plus million, 700,000 is budgeted for next year, but in reality, it will be spread over several years to come.
At least 2.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Tammy, you have another question? Why don't you go ahead?
You mentioned that there'd be some payments by the legacy districts. Is that a percentage of the contract, or is that a specific amount?
It's based on what you all appropriate. And so in your, when you vote to approve your budgets, there's a communications line in that budget. It's very small for SDIC and for Penn One in particular, and then Penn Two and MCDD pay a little bit more. But it's largely for website maintenance costs. There's a little bit of facilitation support for decision-making processes around the PMOS project, stuff like that. So you approve that budget annually, and then that's all we'll spend on these contracts.
Right, so with this being a 5-year contract, what happens when those districts go away? Does that liability shift to the urban district?
I'm looking at Hong, who's shaking her head. The contracts will just move over to the new district, right? Hong?
Yeah. This is trying to contract at the highest efficiency level in terms of it's a contract that is with all districts to provide services to each individual district for whatever work Evan and her communication team determines to be necessary for that respective district. So if Evan determines that there are particular work for SDIC, we would just contract that work out for SDIC and bill SDIC directly. There is no amount that we're committing to the vendor unless the work is performed respective to the district. And if there is, arguably the liability would be merged to the urban district.
The urban district would pick that up. And then with this going 5 years out, we're well into the permanent board. Are
With
we,
any luck.
yeah, are we hitting them with any liability from the contract?
So there's no guarantee of payment in this contract.
Right.
It just gives us the ability to contract up to that amount. The board has to appropriate the funds on an annual basis. And if the board doesn't appropriate the funds, we can't spend the money.
This
So
is
the term liability is sort of funny to use because we're not guaranteeing these vendors anything.
right. There are no liabilities incurred by just approving this contract. Liabilities are only incurred if services have been performed and we're subject to pay. This contract is just, it's basically just making sure that there are vendors available to do the work that's anticipated, but until the work is performed, there's no liability.
Okay. Well, how about expense then rather than liability? Is that a little better?
Well, there's no expense incurred until you write a work order and
Right.
agree to work, and then the
Right.
work is performed, then the money's due. And they can spend no more money than you have appropriated on an annual budget basis, either for this district or any of the legacy districts.
And if you
So
spend more
limit-
than 100,000, we have to come get approval for it.
Does that help, Tanny?
It does.
Okay, Eric, I think you're next, and then Mary Helen.
Okay, thank you. So Evan, one of the things that would be very helpful is if we had either a statement of the qualifications of the principal that would be leading this engagement with us, or something that would indicate why this is somebody that has the expertise to be able to deliver on that.
So Eric, I'm going to push back.
I went to the Kearns and West website, and it looks like they're an urban planning organization.
So we've been through a very rigorous procurement process, and it's staff's job to select the vendors. We'd be happy to meet with you and talk about why we pick these folks, but it's really not an appropriate role for the board to get in the middle of choosing our vendors. I just have to push
Right.
back. I'm sorry.
No, but you're not pushing back in an appropriate manner.
Okay, then help me understand the question, because
Right.
I'm happy
So
to.
what we're trying to say is you need to build confidence with your board that these are the people that have the expertise to be able to deliver. And all I've requested is the information that led you to that conclusion.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm not
Thank you,
selecting
Eric.
somebody else different from this.
Okay.
Thank
Well,
you.
We'll get you the information. Mary Helen?
My question is, only because I kind of ran into this in another way. With a contract, and Hong, I think this is sort of beyond my scope of knowing the legality, but what if one of these firms that we say we're going to do this 5-year arrangement sells new owners, and we don't, I don't know the term, but we don't like or don't want to deal with who the new people are because their focus changed? How binding is that? And in my experience, it was a nightmare. So
We don't use them. If we don't like them, we don't use them. There's no
you could
requirement.
say, no, this doesn't, okay, this is just
Correct.
permission to work with the people that
Yeah.
we've worked with, that we like and have done
Yes.
good work. Is that basically it?
Correct. And also, I should also add that there is a term in this agreement, as it is in most public contract agreement, that it's all subject to board appropriation, budget appropriation.
Okay.
So,
Well, Jim had just said something about the $100,000. So, and it kind of dovetails on what Eric said. I don't know how to say this. I get myself in hot water saying these things, but Jim likes them and they're wonderful and he knows them, and somebody on the board's had a horrible experience with them. And how do we bridge that gap with this agreement in place?
yeah,
So we did a full, I just want to make it very, very clear.
Yeah.
We did a full public procurement process
Right.
where we
Okay.
put RFP out to over 250 vendors. And we got back 13, 12 of which we considered sort of valid proposals.
Okay.
And so I will tell you, the folks that I've worked with in the past did not get the top score, and we didn't pick them. So this was a mathematic, within reason. It was, did a full process that had scoring.
Yeah, I don't disagree, but that might alleviate some of Eric's concerns that, well, anyway, so, okay, well, that answers. I just thought that we got stuck with these people regardless of who owned the firm, but we aren't. So that's
right. So, Jim and Evan, it might be helpful if you put together a little one-pager that goes through the RFP process. Might be who was involved in the review process and what kind of a scoring system was there, and those kinds of things would be helpful. You may not want to, you can make it as detailed as you want to make it or not, but the board obviously has an interest in how you got to this decision. So we need to be, and if in fact our attorney believes there's some kind of legal liability, you can have that discussion in executive session with your advice on to the board. So you guys can figure out how you want to do that, but there's obviously some interest in the board having some window into the process. So you can figure out how you want to frame that, and Hong, you can help them do that.
We're happy to provide that information. We would like to see if we can move forward with the contracting, however, because
well, I haven't gotten to a motion yet. Okay. So let's see if we can get there. Are there other questions or other comments or issues with this? If not, there is a motion on the agenda that I'd appreciate someone making that we could then debate.
Mr. Chair, I would move to approve and authorize the executive director or their designee to negotiate and sign the contract shown with Kearns and West and Cascadia Partners LLC using the contract templates reviewed and approved by legal counsel.
Thank you, Eric.
I'll second.
I'm sorry, I missed that. Who was it?
Corky.
Steve, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so further questions, comments? I guess I want to say, given the questions and the concerns, that I can just tell you, we do this on a very common basis for a number of different services at the Bureau of Environmental Services. We have on-call contracts for emergency repairs. We have on-call contracts for communications. And so we've used this type of arrangement for lots of different kinds of services. And the limit, of course, is the appropriation that's in our budget annually, an ultimate limit. But within that, the work order itself or the job task that you ask also limits the amount of money that you will spend in an arrangement with the contractor. So I think it's perfectly appropriate for the board to be interested in how we're doing this and how it's going. And I'm assuming that over time we'll get reports about that. So it is a relatively common thing. I think, Eric, you were first and then James.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I was just going to state I'm supportive of it because what I'm understanding we're approving is a framework, an overall framework that can last up to 5 years. There's no commitment for any specific dollar amount to be spent.
Correct.
It's all subject to being appropriated. And the work to be performed isn't yet requested of the firms because that's what has to go on those task orders.
Right.
And any task order that's above the limit is going to come back to the board. So all I see is that we're authorizing staff to go forward with the ability to request work. We're not actually approving that work be done. We're just giving staff the ability to incrementally select for services in individual task orders as they go forward. As to the selection process, yeah, the RFP process is spelled out in the ORS and is part of the procurement rules that we've adopted as an organization. And, I'm confident that the staff has followed the procurement rules. I certainly don't have any objection to them, providing some sort of high level scorecard or report card as to why they felt, these were the outstanding candidates out of the 13 proposals that were provided. But ultimately, there's a rigorous process that they had to follow. And based on at least my understanding of the ORS, we don't really have the ability to go in and say, no, we want to pick firm number 5 because we like them better and their logo and their website looks better. That basically violates the procurement rules and the scoring required. So I'm very reluctant to require that the board receive sort of approval information. Either we have confidence in Jim and his staff to do the job and follow the procurement rules that the board's approved, or if we don't, then that's a different conversation.
Thank you, Eric. James?
Thanks, Mike. I would echo everything that Eric just mentioned. Most of my job at BES is to oversee on-call price agreements with consulting firms for engineering services. And so all of what Eric said about the public procurement process and its transparency and its rules is clear. I would add, if it helps the board, that in my role as a Penn One board member, I have been, privy to other solicitation efforts by MCDD and Penn One to secure professional services for planning of a drainage master plan, as well as sharing information back and forth between MCDD and Penn One on how engineering services are procured for pump stations. And I just have a lot of confidence in the organization. And lastly, I think someone mentioned the idea of approving an on-call price agreement with a consultant firm, and then that consultancy changing, as they often do. Typically in these proposals, the consultant team has to propose on their approach, their key personnel, a great number of things. And so if anything they do organizationally changes, they still need to meet the requirements of the price agreement and each task order. So I'm definitely on board, but I do appreciate the board wanting to understand this standard work much better. So thank you.
Thank you, James. Corky.
Yeah, I just want to applaud everybody for being so interested in this and so interested in making sure that our contracts are effective. That's great. I'm going to be using my attention to focus on how effective the result of those contracts is. So I look forward to that communication from Jim, about this is what we did and here's how effective it's been or how ineffective it's been, and we'll go from there. So I echo everything that's been said already and look forward to the upcoming process. Thanks.
Thank you, Corky. Any further comments or questions before we vote?
Chair?
Yes, Ed.
Yeah, I'd just like to say that being new to this process, I appreciate very, very much the back and forth and the questions, because I know that they're serious matters, but I appreciate the fact that the conversation has allowed each side to express itself, and I'm comfortable listening to both sides, and I will support this measure as well. Okay.
Appreciate that, Ed. Thank you. Any other questions? If not, Wendy, would you call the roll, please?
Michael Jordan,
Yes.
Steve Fancher,
Yes.
Eric Mueller,
Yes.
Dave Ritma,
Yes.
Corky Collier,
Yes.
James Allison,
Yes.
Mary Helen Kincaid,
Yes.
Tammy Stephenson,
Yes.
Eric Molander,
Yes.
Ed Washington,
Yes.
Right.
count 10 votes.
Okay. Thank you, Wendy. Appreciate it. Thank you all. And I'll echo some of the comments. Thank you for the robust conversation and questions. And I think if nothing else, we are all learning together, and we'll continue to do that. So that's great. Hong, I think you're next, the consent agenda process.
I am. Thanks for having me. I don't have any fancy PowerPoint presentation, so we'll just be looking at each other's beautiful faces here. I want to bring forth to you two process improvement efficiency matters. One is a consent agenda item and one is a voice vote. I understand from prior meetings, there was a desire to move things quickly with respect to the fact that this is a large board and there are matters that are so routine that it's not necessary to do some of the formal requirements that our bylaw have us doing. So I'll just take this, the consent agenda item process first. We had the foresight to include authorization for you all to use consent agenda in the bylaws. It provides for, it identifies the need if we were to bring those to you, that there needs to be a unanimous vote. And if there isn't that, or somebody feels uncomfortable about the agenda, it can be pulled. So, and because this is a new district and we've never done it before, I felt compelled that we introduce it to this board and get your heads up and approval for us to move forward. Because some of us may not have been involved or have experience in working on boards. And so there's some variability in experience there. And I want to make sure that we all have the same information and we're all operating at the same level of information as well. So to the extent that you aren't familiar with how consent agenda work, it's a process to be able to get quick approval efficiently on items that aren't controversial, that are fairly routine, and we won't use any meeting time to discuss them unless you pull them from the consent agenda. The expectation is that staff will be providing you with ample opportunity and time to review the documentation prior to the meeting, and that when we roll into the meeting that you can just have a vote on that, and you vote on all the items that are on the consent agenda as a group. So for example, one of the items we think would be most appropriate for a consent agenda would be your meeting minutes from the prior meetings. Staff reports, if they aren't controversial, giving you updates on projects. Any voting on anything that there is general consensus or known consensus. Voting on things that have been adequately briefed to you and there aren't known disputes. So we laid out a process in the memo for you. Thankfully, we have Wendy's capable hand to track that for us, and we'll be presenting that to you going forward. My understanding is there are a number of consent agenda items that will be coming forth for this particular meeting. And so with respect to this particular presentation, I don't know that, well, it would be helpful for us to get your approval or thumbs up that we could start using the consent agenda as laid out in the memo, so that then you all can be expecting that for future items. I see one.
Yeah, Hong, let me just ask, does anybody have an objection to us using the procedure that Hong put in regarding the chair asking about any items to be removed or any questions, and then without objection, passing a consent agenda? Anybody want to make an argument to not do that?
My question is, why wouldn't we? I mean, the consent agenda that I know the most about is city council, and a whole lot of stuff goes on behind the scenes till they get agreement, and they don't put anything there unless, well, Mike, other city council people, other places know that there's far more discussion beforehand, but we I have come to understand that I don't remember how many, but I can't discuss my questions or my concerns with more than 2 board members without it being a public meeting, whatever. So how, and I don't know the rules behind Portland City Council. So how would we, I may not know that somebody has a concern because I don't know things. I mean, my accounting is poor, but Eric Molander's, sort of an expert at it and many others. So he might have an objection or see one. But if
And-
we can't talk about it, how do we
And
find out that we should be concerned?
So Mary Helen, you're gonna rely on all that expertise of everybody here, because I'm gonna ask if anybody wants to remove anything from the consent agenda and discuss it. I'm gonna ask them if they have any objections to anything that's on the consent agenda. And everybody on this call and whoever else is here at other meetings will have the ability to pull something, and then we'll have a conversation about it. And people can talk about any objections they might have. Is that okay?
Sure, that's fine, because under, I don't know what page 5, whatever it says, the provisions, directors are encouraged to ask questions on consent items prior to the meeting. But how, who and how do we ask you?
You'll get these things in writing in your packet before the meeting.
Okay.
And just like today, if you have a question of staff or actually of another board member, you're perfectly free to ask questions of folks.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I've
Okay.
never been limited in asking questions.
I know that you've never been shy, so not worried about that.
And you may ask questions of consent agenda items as long and to the extent they're simple ones, we can respond to them. But if they get into an area that's more complicated or may raise dispute, it would be something that would be worth pulling from and putting in as a regular item to be discussed by the full board. This discussion today, I wanted to have it today so that you are all on notice that there will be a consent agenda being used going forward. So it will likely require more attention by you respective board members to read through some of those items as you feel appropriate before you come into the meeting.
Okay, hon, we're gonna practice. So
Hang on, I got
I
one
know
more.
I know you have another item, so
Okay.
go ahead.
There's another efficiency improvement proposal here, which is to allow for voice voting process. The bylaws identify that we need to, in order to take in your votes, that we have to do a roll call and identify the results of the voice with respect to the identity of each of the board member. My understanding is that can take a lot of time, especially when things are so routine and non-controversial, that we wanted to implement a process that allows for it to go faster by doing a voice vote. In this particular case, there are 2 options we could achieve that. One, we go in and change the bylaw and allow for a voice vote, or 2, you adopt this proposal that we have in the memo here, and really the proposal is just to assure that there's adequate documentation and the tracking of which directors vote which way in the minutes. So when there's a proposal for a voice vote, we will ask that you vote in a block, affirmative, negative, or abstain. And those who vote in the negative would need to identify themselves specifically so that Wendy can identify who those individuals are. And so we don't need to go through the roll call of those who voted in the affirmative or in the majority. So but as the result of that will show on the meeting minutes of everybody who voted in accordance with how they vote. That's probably not the best explanation. And I know that this was something Wendy had developed. So Wendy, if I'm missing something here, maybe you can provide a little bit more clarity on that.
Thanks, Hong. And I see that Eric Molinder has a question as well, but I'll just say that I proposed this because you started doing it already without permission and you were technically violating your bylaws. And so, as Hong said, the cleanest way to fix this is to change your bylaws. So you're welcome to do that as well. But basically, it's just basically saying all in favor, aye, opposed, nay, and then, and so if there are just a small number of people that are voting against something or for something, then I can just note those. So in the minutes, you'll see that the bylaws require me to identify each person by name and whether they're voting yes, no, or they're absent. And that's how I've been recording the minutes.
Okay.
Let me ask.
Thank you. Eric, you have a question?
Yeah, Mike, how do we request a roll call vote?
That's a good question. I suppose anybody can request it at any time, and I can't see there would be an objection. But and if I may, I'd like to make a suggestion here, because I'd suggest that we amend our bylaws and have staff bring back language that would allow for this kind of voting. And then we can all look at it. We all can anticipate how it would work. And it's clear for future boards that may not, or future board members that may not be here now, as to how our voting works. Hong and Wendy, are you okay with bringing us back some bylaw change language that would allow for this?
I'm happy to, if that's the board's will. I understood that there was a desire to implement this process earlier. So that's why we brought up this interim proposal.
No, I appreciate that. And I'm open to whatever the board wants, obviously, but I just wanted to try and maybe add clarity for future board members that might not even be on this call, or actually current board members that are not on this call.
Yeah.
And we did just lose Steve Fancher, so we are down.
Okay, well, I'm going to request that, and that will provide clarity to everybody, and we'll feel comfortable with that. We've got the language we're looking for, and I really appreciate you bringing it forward. These meetings can get a little cumbersome sometimes, so I appreciate any attempt to streamline our work. So thank you, Hong. Appreciate both items very much. And in fact, I'm going to try and practice right now, if that's okay with you.
I was just going to say, if I may ask Wendy to reflect that the consent item process is approved, but the voice vote process will need to be revised, is not approved. So with that, I'll lend it over to you, Mike, and carry out your consent agenda process.
Yeah, well, we're going to practice. I hope this.
Did I miss a vote on the consent agenda process, or was that not necessary? Sorry, I missed that.
I think there was just a general approval, which was what we needed. It's already in the bylaw, so.
Okay. All right.
We didn't want to surprise anybody with it.
Well, it's hard to not surprise me, so thanks for the heads up. So next item on the agenda is the consent agenda, and I'm going to go through these questions and just see. Is there anybody who wishes to remove an item from the consent agenda today? So now I'd ask for a motion to accept the consent agenda.
Mr. Chair, I move that we accept the consent agenda.
Thank you, Eric. Appreciate it.
And I'll second that.
Terrific. Thank you, Corky. So now we're open to any questions anybody might have on any item on the consent agenda. If there are no questions, are there any objections to the approval? With no objections, the consent agenda is approved. Thank you so much, Hong. That went so fast. Thank you. Lightning speed. Jim, you're up. Executive Director report.
Do you guys want to go to the LRC first? And Wendy, I apologize if I'm out of my lane.
Sounds like a good idea.
Okay, so what we would do then is we're gonna adjourn to the LRC IGA meeting. Is that what we're doing?
That's correct.
Okay,
Can I just make one general statement? It's nothing about what we've been talking about, but Ben wrote a memo and I've been going through my notes and it was about budget questions. And he listed out 10 key deliverables. I just wanted to point out, if you hadn't seen it, that the board is number 10 and our key deliverable is fun. And I'm going to say this in no negative fashion. If this is people's idea of fun, you need to find something else to have fun with. But anyway, I just wanted to make, I thought that was good and I missed it the first time around and I appreciate his humor.
all right. Well, we need to start working on more fun, that's for sure. And the first order of fun might be to actually meet in person sometime. And then we could actually have some fun. So that would be good. All right. So we're adjourned to the thank you, Mary Helen, LRC IGA board meeting. And I think all the members
I would
have,
like to call the roll if that's all right.
okay, go for it.
James Allison,
Yes.
Mary Helen Kincaid,
Yes.
Corky Collier.
Yep.
Tanny Stephenson,
Here.
Ann Gravitt, not present. Shirley Craddock, not present. Lori Stegman, not present. Steve Fancher, not present. Dave Ripma,
Here.
Eric Mueller,
Here.
Michael Jordan.
Here.
And because we have limited participation, Colin suggested that we skip the election of the chair until next month.
I'm okay with that. You can elect anybody you want, as long as it's not me. I'm kidding a bit. So if we don't do that, we've got the roll call. We're going to skip the chair. And so Ben, is Ben going to present the budget, proposed budget, Ben?
I do. I have the proposed budget for this group. Good afternoon. Thanks for having me again. When we look at the Levee Ready Columbia program budget, the Levee Ready Columbia program budget resides within the JCA. And the board has seen this before there in February, but I'm happy to go through it again as the board wishes. There's no changes since February. Just in high level overview, there's a 5% increase in partner contributions. That's the revenue from all of our partners. I do have a slide to show that. Also, just a friendly reminder that 2023-24 will be the final Levee Ready Columbia program budget. That is not this budget. That would be the budget after this one. And when we look at this budget and we look at what it funds, this budget will fund the project alternative selection, the advancement of the PMLS project. It'll move the non-PMLS projects to 30% design in 2022-23, and it will move those same projects to 60% design in the subsequent year, 23-24. It will also fund the FEMA coordination and recertification. It'll support the development of the Urban Flood Safety and Water Quality District development, engagement with the community and outreach events. This is a very high level overview of the budget. It's $1.2 million. Again, the 5% increase in partner contributions, this is revenue, is $38,000. In materials and services, it's about a $400,000 increase, 128%. You'll see that right here in projects and planning. So this projects and planning increase, $409,000 increase, is included in that materials and services increase of 403. This is the slide I was referring to. These are all of our partner contributions coming. These are revenue line items coming into the LRC program budget. In total for this proposed budget is $800,000. Again, this is a 5% increase over the current year. And this is just a forecast for next year, a proposed 5% increase next year. Again, that would be the final year of this program budget. And I just wanted to give a little bit of detail here when we look at certification projects. Like I mentioned, this is in the projects and planning category, that $539,000. This $539,000 will get, this is the engineering design. This will get you to the 30% design. And again, in 2024, it'll get these same projects to 60% design as the board directed. And then in the capital outlay, this is where the 3 staff positions are funded at 0.8 FTE each. They reside in this area, the Levee accreditation in capital outlay. And the reason we're putting these staff positions, the funding for these staff positions here is in case we can capitalize these costs and also recapture these costs through any grant funds. So that's why they're placed in capital outlay. So just looking forward really quick, we're scheduled to approve this budget and refer it to the JCA. And then I believe we have a May 16th Urban District Board meeting that will approve formally approve the JCA budget. And with that, I appreciate your time and thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Questions, Ben?
Ben, there's no action that you need from the LRC IGA board this evening?
Really good question. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the only action we would need is for this board to approve this program budget and refer it to the JCA board for formal approval.
Wendy, did you have a
Well,
question?
it's my understanding that that would happen during the May meeting. That's how Colin outlined it to me, was that the LRC IGA would recommend this budget to the JCA in May, and then the JCA would approve it in June during the format meeting.
My mistake. Thank you. Thank you.
And I appreciate that. And we have just barely a quorum today. So it might make sense to delay till May. So any other questions? If not, I think that's the last thing I have on the agenda. Is it all right to adjourn? Wendy?
Sounds fine to me if you.
All right. Well, then the LRC IGA board is adjourned for today. And Jim, you want to go back to the executive director's report?
Sure, thank you. I have just a few things for you today. First, I want to say thank you for approving the IGA amendment with MCDD. It is really important for your staff capacity that we do that. So thank you. As Keith alluded to, we are going to be looking at some additional efficiencies coming forward. Most of those affect the legacy districts, but we wanted you to know we're trying to free up as much capacity to focus on the startup as we can while still operating the current system. We are just over halfway, maybe 2/3 of the way through a pay equity study, which is really important. Again, it's an MCDD item, but I wanted you all to know about it because it could have some impacts on the equity of pay across our organization. And we're really excited to be coming into compliance with the new Oregon law. In terms of revenues that are important, we are also launching the assessment process this month for the legacy districts. And that's the work that we do with Multnomah County and a bunch of other stakeholders to ensure that we have the appropriate cost drivers in place and that we're assessing properties accurately and equitably under our current rules. I want to let you know that Evan has made incredible progress with our polling vendor. We have a first draft of a polling instrument. We'll be coming back to you at an upcoming meeting to review a draft once it's in a little bit better shape. But our goal is to have the polling done in the next 2 months so that we'll have better information to inform your policymaking and work around program and revenue development. We have a bunch of staffing changes. As you know, we unfortunately lost our other lawyer to Metro, and we're mad about that, but we're also excited for her. And Hong has done a great job lining up some outside counsel support and is working with our HR team on a new recruitment to backfill Kelly, who we can't possibly backfill, but we'll get somebody good. We started a new operations team member last week, which is really exciting for them. We're in the final throes this week of selecting a new emergency manager and project manager to replace Brian Eberhardt, who left us to go be with family in the Midwest. And as we talked about earlier today, we moved Emily Robinson over to a project manager role for all things transition to the new utility. And we're in final interviews with a limited duration position office manager to backfill her role. We also posted on Friday assistant finance manager position to help with all of the work coming at us around rate making and dissolution. And we also have posted for our director of finance and administration position that Nick used to hold, that Keith is in an interim role, and we're very excited about that position. We've retained the services of Mary Rowe, who helped with my recruitment, to help ensure we get a really good candidate there. And the last thing I want to report on is we are working very closely with the Port of Portland and the City of Portland on additional work related to the houseless situation. We are aware that the city is working with us and a bunch of other partners to do a major cleanup at Pump Station 4 and Big Four Corners. We're working with all the appropriate city bureaus on a security plan for the site. Once we get vehicles out of there, we'll try and provide better access control to the site to prevent future problems. We also are working with Portland Bureau of Transportation and others to secure the site around Marine Drive and I-205. And we've already put some additional eco blocks in place along the trail to prevent additional vehicle access there. We've made good progress on 33rd Avenue where we have to clean culverts up. And we're seeing a lot more progress in other areas as well. So we're seeing the gears are picking up speed with all of our partner agencies, and we hope that will translate to improved conditions for our crew on the ground. And with that, we're continuing to be really optimistic about the Business Oregon grants for the pre-construction engineering and design study that we're engaged with the Corps of Engineers on. For those of you who are on the legacy boards, you already know that we're seeking $4 million in state grant funds to help pay the local share of the pre-construction engineering and design. We've submitted those applications, or are on the cusp of submitting them. And again, that should really cover the vast majority of the local share. And as you may know, President Biden included the core funding for the federal share of the pre-construction and engineering design costs in his proposed budget, which was a very pleasant surprise and puts us in a really good position to win the federal side of those pre-construction engineering and design costs. And I think with that, given that it is 4:57 p.m., I will stop talking and answer any questions that you may have.
I was just wondering if the president was going to visit one of our levees since he's going to be in town.
We're all going to find out.
Mary Helen?
I have two questions. Well, one statement about your work with the port and the Sunderland site that was one of the 4 sites named for Safe Rest Village, and it'll be the first Safe Rest parking. Something that MCDD helped champion since 2016, along with the port, and I finally convinced PBOT to give up the land and to use it. So that's a really exciting thing because it will provide a lot of services in an area that won't be adjacent to residential property. Just put that out there so you can kind of follow that. They're going to have meetings. And I think MCDD and the port were very instrumental in supporting that cause. The other thing has been on my top 10 list. And when you do this public engagement, Evan, wherever you are, I don't know, can we get a new name? This Urban Flood Safety Water Quality District just doesn't roll off your tongue. And I think it'll be difficult for people to remember it or even what it means. I don't know, but since we have these experts in opinion polling and questions, see what people come up with, because I've heard everything, the urban district, the new flood district. And I think if we had a identity, that would help besides all those, a 6-letter acronym. But that's just me not being able to remember what every acronym I hear is.
It's really hard to type.
Well, yeah, and it doesn't, a lot of times when you type something and it doesn't autofill, this doesn't autofill because I don't think it makes sense even to those autofill programs. So.
Well, the exciting news is the work that you all did today will lead us to negotiating contracts with the firms that can help us figure this out. So we're excited about that. And I appreciate you bringing that up.
If Kearns West comes up with a killer name, they will have earned their 2 million right there.
Yeah, I agree.
Thank you, Mary Helen. So before we go, just one other thing. Some of you may have noticed, but I am leaving the Bureau of Environmental Services next month to another job at the City of Portland. I will start as the city's Chief Administrative Officer on May the 10th. And it will require me to leave this board. And so I will be working with the city council to make another appointment for the city of Portland. And so I'll be working with Jim and rest of you on the board to make that as smooth a transition as possible. But wanted to let you know that this has truly been a pleasure and will continue to be as long as I'm here. But really enjoy working with all of you. And so stay tuned. I wanted to kind of put it on your radar. We're going to have to be making some changes here. So thanks for all your help. And this is a great group and we're doing good work and want to really appreciate the staff. So
Mike, will this be your last meeting?
No, I'll be here in May for sure. And then I'm trying to arrange with city council to make another appointment to represent the city before I go. So we don't want to, we, as you well know, we struggle a little bit with quorum on occasion. So I don't want to leave another empty chair. So we'll get there. So thank you all very much.
Well,
Thank you.
I couldn't repeat in a public meeting what I just said when you said that, but, or I could, but I'd probably be censored. I think your contributions have made us be successful along with everybody else's, but thank you so much. And I think this warrants a in-person party at some point.
We might have to figure that out.
Yeah, I've been so fearful of not going anywhere without a mask and, out in public, but I might make an exception if we get to have a party for you. So
That's so nice of you, Mary Helen. Thank you. But whether for good or ill, you will see me in May. So you guys have a great evening. Thanks for everything. Appreciate it. We're adjourned.